I'm here at the Reclaiming Canada conference in Victoria. With me today is Chris Barber, one of the main organizers of the Freedom Convoy. Chris and Tamara have been subjected to a great deal of persecution from our government. And this is continuing, despite the fact that many people think that this is over, it's in the past. Well, it's not. And here is Chris to talk about it. Chris, thanks so much for taking your time for this interview.
Thanks for having me, Owen.
So for those people who may not know, and I jokingly said before the interview, who've been living under a rock and don't know who you are or what you've done, please give us a quick recap of how you got involved with the Freedom Convoy and what your role was.
Well, I guess I was one of the main people that brought Canadians together in January of 2022 after the mandates for the Justin Trudeau mandates for unvaccinated truck drivers across the U.S.-Canadian borders. That affected my business. It affected a lot of my friends and fellow workmates. How the action it organically started and took off from there.
Right. And now, of course, I know Bridget quite well. Mm-hmm. And I think it started when Bridget contacted you or you contacted her. I'm not sure which way it went.
Bridget contacted me through social media.
Right.
The original idea was to do slow rolls around our provinces, our independent provinces around capitals or our parliament. And then morphed into the idea of, I guess, going to Ottawa to take it right to the Hill.
Right. Now, I interviewed Jody Ledgerwood. I came out for the convoy, and my producer and I came out, and we spent like 2 weeks trying to find a flight, which we couldn't do because we were not vaxxed. We couldn't fly.
Right.
And so finally we decided to drive. And due to weather, unfortunately, we arrived the day after. They shut everything down.
Really?
But I did get to do a number of interviews with people on the ground there, and Jody Ledgerwood was one of them, and she was, of course, front and center through the whole thing. So when I was interviewing Jody, she told me that at the peak, there was about 300 trucks in Ottawa. Is that about right? And now I know there's a lot more than that traveled across the country, but a lot of people couldn't stay because they had to work.
Yeah. Downtown Ottawa, we had different numbers because the trucks moved in and out on a regular basis. Trucks would leave, trucks would come. So on average, 300 to 500 trucks probably at max. Mm-hmm. The rest of the trucks would be housed outside the city. We had a 302 Coventry, which was a staging area just outside the city. That place was packed. We had we called it Exit 88 Embrum. There was a farmer out there that plowed a quarter section of the field and did a beautiful job plowing it. And we had it was almost like a tent city out there. You walked in the tent and you had cooking, you had food, you had supplies, everybody was in a safe atmosphere out there. So between the three different spots, it was amazing. There was a lot of people.
And so this was a huge thing, Chris. I mean, I'm an Albertan, and I was watching the people on the overpasses as the trucks are going past. And it was, sure, you said 300 to 500 trucks that might have been in Ottawa at any given time, but there was thousands involved in this convoy. Went on for miles and miles and miles. And so you're the organizer. And so what kind of challenges did you run into organizing this?
Well, I often refer to truck drivers as trying to herd cats. If you put 200 truck drivers in a room, alone and close the door, somebody's going to come under there with a bruised lip and a fat eye and a black eye. We managed to, everything worked organically and everything worked perfectly. Spacing the convoy out as we went across Canada was a big thing. Adjusting your speeds, radio communication, that was constantly going on throughout the thing. I'd heard our line was approximately 30 miles long behind us, which was pretty evident when we went through the city of Winnipeg. Winnipeg was there was people on the west side of Winnipeg that were still sitting there as we were watching the trucks go by as we were clearing Winnipeg on the opposite side of the city. So
now, when you guys were in Ottawa, it was, contrary to what the media was telling everybody, it was safer, it was cleaner. You had garbage bags set out like every, 10 or 20 meters. You were sweeping the sidewalks of snow. You had the bouncy castles for the kids. Hockey. Whose ideas were those?
They were just a collective agreement of the people that came together, and a lot of people came into Ottawa. Whoever or whatever came into Ottawa had a purpose there. We accepted anybody that had 2 arms and 2 legs that could actually be productive and work, and that's exactly what happened. If somebody walked in the door and felt their need to go get paper from Staples for the printers, that's exactly what their job was. We had guys that just decided to open doors for people in the conference rooms. Everything was completely 100% organic and grassroots. It was a moment in time that we'll never ever get back. Like you said, the bouncy castles were one thing that was organically thought of. the hockey games. It was a street on Wellington that was kind of set aside where we did street hockey every day, and a tournament and a little champion. When you're waiting for the Prime Minister to have a conversation, I guess we come up with some pretty inventive Canadian ideas to keep your time.
So I've mentioned the Prime Minister, and I want to get to another subject in a minute, but you've just triggered something for me here. Yeah, I know you guys went to Ottawa with the intent that you were going to have a discussion with the Prime Minister about the violations of your rights. At what point in time did you realize that discussion wasn't going to happen?
I guess we always had hope that it was going to happen. We always had hope that something would happen. Someone from the government. We were in communication with, like I said, police, law enforcement the entire time, whether it be RCMP, OPS, or OPP. In the city, there was ongoing talks between the city, the mayor, and the trucks to try and work together with a solution. The only element that was ever missing was the conversation with the Prime Minister, the whole reason we traveled across the country in the first place. So it's unfortunate. I guess we just held out hope that it was going to happen.
Now, there was some very biased coverage from mainstream media. What were your experiences with that?
Well, I'm a guy that was raised around CTV, CBC. As a kid, I would watch, the National every night with my parents. I would watch, the CTV news. I don't watch mainstream media anymore. In fact, the media was so harsh on us as we traveled across this country with the rhetoric, driven by the Prime Minister. We really didn't want to hear from CBC, CTV, or Global on the ground. We didn't facilitate to them at all. We facilitated to the smaller news groups that were actually paying attention to what was going on the ground and not what the government wanted you to hear. The Rebel News, the Western Standard, those druthers. There's a lot of good media outlets out there. The smaller ones, exactly like yourself, they get the story straight.
So what was it like for you? I mean, as a Canadian and an organizer of this convoy, you're going to Ottawa expecting that you're going to be heard by the Prime Minister, as is your right. You've organized a peaceful protest under your rights. And now you've got the media coming out there and telling outright lies.
Yes.
Outright lies. And things that, for anybody who's on the ground there, were no semblance to reality whatsoever.
Yep.
How much of a sense of disillusionment did you get? Just how weird did that feel?
It's pretty eye-opening. And unfortunately eye-opening. Like I said, you come to expect maybe a little bit more from your government, from your leaders, whether you voted for Justin Trudeau or not. You still expected him to acknowledge your presence instead of right off the bat calling you names. And that's all he did the entire time. And then, you go back through that, the last 2 years through the pandemic, that's all he did was call unvaccinated people names. The rhetoric he used, he divided Canadians. And then this group of people came together and were united. Whether you lived in Quebec or Alberta, you stood on the street corner side by side and shared common ground, which is something that's never happened in this country.
So instead of talking to you, he brings in the Emergencies Measures Act. February 17th, you and Tamara are both arrested under charges of mischief, of all things. I mean, this is the best thing they can come up with. That's the thing that startled me. The thing that really shocked me. I wasn't shocked that the media was lying about you. I was shocked that the average Canadian didn't wake up when they arrested you on charges of mischief. They bring in the Emergency Measures Act. They tell people that you guys are terrorists and that you're a violent threat. And then they arrest you on mischief. I mean, to me, that would have been to most people the signal that something doesn't add up here.
Don't forget frozen bank accounts.
And frozen bank accounts. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, my bank accounts remained frozen for 3.5 months after. I'm not sure many people know that. Toronto Dominion Bank was 3.5 months frozen. I would go into the local branch, and I've dealt with her since I was a teenager, and have conversations with them. And the only thing they could tell me, I would say, what grounds or what reasons are my bank accounts still frozen? And they would give me a phone number of a person named Jay in Toronto, no last name, and he would never answer my questions or my calls either. So to this day, a year and a half later, I still don't know or have a reason why my bank accounts were frozen for as long as they were.
Wow. So you spent 26 hours in jail.
Yes.
Tamara, weeks. Why do you think that they did that to Tamara but not to you?
That's a good question.